What is going on, everybody? Walking Dead fans, I assume if you're watching this video. Welcome to the Rantin Review Entertainment. We did a season recap of seasons 1 and 2 of The Walking Dead, given the fact that the season 11 premiere is coming up in just a couple of weeks. However, looking back on it, I decided after looking at YouTube that there's a whole bunch of videos out there that recap The Walking Dead season by season. So I decided to do something kind of original. Instead of going by season, I decided I was gonna go by story arcs, which I haven't really seen too many people do. Now, defining Walking Dead story arcs in a TV show is kind of difficult. It's not like the comic book where they're kind of defined specifically, and season by season, each season isn't specifically one story arc. The story arcs kind of go over multiple seasons. So I was able to break it down to about 5. Today we're going to talk about the first story arc, surprisingly called The Beginning. Some people may call it the Shane arc as well. It lasts from seasons 1 through 2, and it pretty much sets up the universe, tells a story about a love triangle, and introduces us to the crew and what we can expect from this show. It's important to note too, from the opening shot of this show, which is Rick stumbling out into a street full of dead bodies, and then he sees what he thinks is a little girl who's actually a zombie, or what we come to know as a walker, and shoots her through the head with his Colt Python. That is how the show starts, and it pretty much was a way for them to tell you what kind of show this was going to be. It's fairly important to know this too, because I think this is where some of the confusion comes with a lot of the people who fall in love with the show at the beginning and then fell out of love with the show. I think the show had a lot of appeal because it was, you know, a zombie apocalypse at that particular point in time in 2010. That was a very in vogue thing. There were tons of zombie movies out there, 28 Days Later, revivals of Dawn of the Dead, etc., etc., etc. But The Walking Dead being a fairly popular comic book, being adapted to AMC, and proven to be one of AMC's biggest, most profitable TV shows, along with Breaking Bad at the time, it did something that really brought a new flavor to television. The violence, the gore, the language, the situations, and not doing, again, as exhibited by the very opening shot of the show, not doing what you expect of a TV show. This was not going to be happy endings, and that works and doesn't work to some extent. And again, I think as the show went on and it didn't seem to be like there was going to be some happy ending, people kind of were like, well, wait a minute, what's the ending going to be? Is there going to be an ending? It's going to go on forever. And I think that is one of the assets of the show, but also a detriment. It's kind of a double-edged sword. So the show begins with Rick and Shane, who are two cops in Georgia, and they're talking about the intricacies of their love lives, and then they wind up getting called to track down some bank robbers, I believe, and there's a big shootout. Rick gets shot not once, but twice. The first one catches his vest, he's okay, but the second one, because they didn't know there was a third guy in the car, actually hits him pretty badly, and Rick winds up in a coma. When Rick comes out of a coma, he finds himself in a zombie apocalypse in a hospital that is overrun, and there are dead people everywhere. There is the first of many helicopters that we see throughout the first couple of seasons, which would be a reoccurring theme throughout the entirety of The Walking Dead, especially Rick's storyline and his time on the show. So soon after that, we meet Morgan, first of many favorite characters on the show. Rick's coming out of hospital. He's, you know, in his gown, hospital gown. He goes back to his old house, finds that his wife and his child have gone away. We, of course, later find out that his wife, Lori, and his son, Carl.
Carl? Is that how he says it?
Carl.
We're gonna fight this thing together. Everybody.
Carl are at this camp with Shane, and they have taken up with all of these people who, yeah, they're kind of surviving on the outskirts of the city, away from all the pandemonium. Rick's still out in the suburbs. Morgan kind of informs Rick as to what actually is going on. And, you know, as a bit of exposition, not only to him, but to us as the audience, we find out what had happened, why there was a zombie apocalypse, and how bad is it, and the rules about the zombies in the Walking Dead universe. Rick goes in the city on a horse, of all things, runs into an entire street full of walkers, almost gets himself killed, but he is saved while he's hiding out in a tank, of all things, by a voice on the radio. The voice on the radio turned out to be a character that everybody loves and will love to the end of time, Glenn. Glenn saves Rick. We are then introduced to the rest of the crew. Jackie, Andrea, T-Dog, Morales are all part of this crew who are in the city for their own particular reason, but they have this guy, Merle, who, again, this is early on in the show, who's still a redneck, and he's still racist as hell. In fact, it's kind of shocking now, having seen all the episodes and the seasons of The Walking Dead, going back to the first seasons and seeing this kind of stuff in the show. But Merle's not as shameful about his dislike for black people and Latinos, and his complete, utter lack of respect for women and police and pretty much everybody else, including Democrats. This doesn't last long as Officer Rick comes around and he winds up taking over and telling Merle where to stick all of his BS. They wind up leaving Merle handcuffed to the roof as they escape because they need to get out of Dodge. Once they get back to camp, Rick is reunited with Shane and Lori and Carl. But Shane's not quite happy about it. They all thought that Rick was dead. Turns out that he isn't. And it also turns out that Shane had been banging Rick's wife, Lori, again because Lori thought Rick was dead. Turns out that Shane is hinted to be a little bit of a better fit for Lori and probably a little bit better of a father figure for Carl, as Rick wants to go back off and go back to the city because Daryl Dixon, who is the brother of Merle, how original their parents were with the names, by the way, two characters who weren't in the comic books. Daryl's none too happy at the fact that they left his redneck racist brother on the roof of a building, so Rick, feeling responsible for it, they go back to get Merle, go back and find out Merle's not there. Although they do find his hand. Merle, being kind of an ingenious redneck, cut his own hand off, cauterized it, and wound up escaping without being chewed to death by the walkers. But there's something else left in the city. It's the bag of guns that Rick originally came with that he left when he was ambushed in the street and ran into the tank. But there's another group called the Vatos who laid claim on those guns as well. They wind up taking Glenn, our group winds up taking one of their guys, and then there's a bit of a standoff, which is kind of humorous because the Vatos aren't really dangerous. They're actually kind of sweetheart thugs who were taking care of a home of elderly people who were all left behind during the zombie apocalypse to die, but at least they had enough decency to take care of these old people. Then there's Jim, who has all these premonitions and is just a really weird dude and kind of creepy himself. And then there's an invasion, which you should probably get used to in this show because almost every season, the walkers come in and wherever our group is camped at, they wind up crashing the party. Shane and Rick have this kind of dispute as to whether or not Rick should have taken all the guys and gone back to the city, but Rick is kind of like, if we hadn't done that, we wouldn't have had the guns to fight back the walkers. So Lori's kind of caught in the middle of the two of them, and it's a big, big mess. Crazy guy has more premonitions, but he's been bit, so they wind up having to deal with him, leaving him on the side of the road. The crew splits up. Morales decides to take his family. They're not going to go to the CDC. They're going to go elsewhere. So Rick and everybody else goes to the CDC because they think they can find answers there and safety and food and shelter. We then cut to Jenner, who is the last scientist apparently at the CDC, and not a pretty good one because he winds up burning all the samples that could possibly lead to them finding a cure for this thing in a moment of pure just incompetence. Shane wants to know what is going on. Jenner comes to tell him about wildfire, which is the name that they gave to this disease, which apparently reanimates the brainstem, the lower brain functions, which is why you have zombies walking around. Scientifically not quite viable because over time the human body decomposes into sludge, so the walkers probably wouldn't last more than a couple months, but for the sake of a TV show, we'll let this slide. Jenner also lets them know that the place is about to blow up and they're all trapped inside and he's not going to let them out. Rick pleads with Jenner to give them a chance, and in a very poetic line that will come back about 7 years later on the show, Rick thanks Jenner for giving them a chance, and Jenner says that they will come where you won't be. But we're many years until that day when Rick has an encounter with a baseball bat that will make him, A couple people decide they want to stay. Jackie wants to stay. She doesn't. She saw the trailers for seasons 2 through 11, and she's like, hell no, I ain't doing any of that. I'll just die right here. Andrea wants to die too because she lost her sister during the zombie invasion at the campsite, but Dale, who's a little bit creepy McCreepers with her, decides that he's going to guilt trip her and stay too, so she decides, no, I'm going to leave along with you because I'm not going to have your death on my conscience, which she wouldn't have a conscience. She would have been dead because the place is going to explode. Carol, who earlier on found a grenade that Rick earlier on found at the police station, and one of these great things that The Walking Dead does is they bring back things that you were like, why did they do that? And then you're like, oh, that's why they showed that. Carol's got the grenade. The grenade is the only thing that can break the glass of the CDC, thus allowing our crew to get out just in time before the place explodes. And that ends season 1, and we're off to new adventures in the zombie apocalypse. Now we're on to season 2, and things start off pretty badly. The crew is caught in a traffic jam, of all things, in the zombie apocalypse on this road of all these abandoned cars. They try to scavenge for what they can, because there's probably a lot of stuff there that they can take, including drugs and all kinds of other stuff. But pretty soon we have yet another horde of walkers. As the crew tries to get around this, T-Dog stumbles and bumbles and gets his arm cut again. Redneck Daryl starts to save him as they start to kind of move Daryl's character away from kind of the racist beginnings of his brother in season 1. But Sophia, who is Carol's young daughter and one of the 2 kids in the crew along with Carl, winds up running away and getting separated from the crew. Chased away by walkers, Rick goes south to save her. He does catch up with her, tells her to stay so he can lead the walkers away. And then when he leads the walkers away, she's supposed to run back to the cars, back to the rest of the crew. One problem with this is Sophia is a little girl who is terrified and has a bad sense of direction, so she winds up getting herself lost. When Rick and everybody else come back to find Sophia, they can't. Shane, Rick, and Carl stumble upon a deer, and there's a moment of wonder, but until a bullet goes through Carl because some guy was hunting the deer, the bullet went through the deer and winds up striking Carl. Otis, the man who shot Carl and the deer, wind up telling them about the farm the Greene family has, where the patriarch, a man named Herschel Greene, can possibly save his son's life because he's a doctor, sort of, a veterinarian, but close enough. Dale and Andrea continue their kind of creepy little back and forth as Dale is way too overprotective of much younger Andrea, who knows he's kind of a creepy old man. And she's kind of like, leave me alone. He doesn't want her to have the gun. There's a lot of, again, in these earlier seasons, a lot of this kind of old school kind of misogyny and creepiness, and the women are doing the laundry and the men are doing the men work. And Andrea's like, I ain't having any of that. I'm not just going to do laundry and cut peaches and tomatoes. I want to learn how to shoot. So she learns how to shoot. Dale doesn't like it, but he has no real choice. Meanwhile, Daryl has taken it upon himself in this continuing redemption of him as a character to not just be a one-dimensional redneck. He decides he's going to take it upon himself to go find Sophia. He's going to find this little girl. He's the most gung-ho about it, as most everybody else after a couple days are like, that little girl dead. You start seeing the early signs of the Carol-Daryl relationship here in season 2. There's a little hint of it in season 1, but it really comes together in season 2 as Daryl decides he's going to save Carol's little girl just to do this for this poor lady who has to deal with a lot of crap. Yeah, and Daryl loses it a little bit, winds up cutting off a bunch of zombie ears and stringing them around his neck. He walks back to the camp, and Andrea, who's just learning how to shoot, really wants to shoot a walker. They see somebody coming through the trees. She thinks it's a walker. It's not. It's Daryl, and she shoots him, sort of. The antagonist of this era, which is Shane, and his increasing jealousy over the fact that he can't have Lori, but he's in love with Lori. And then we all find out a big bombshell that Lori is pregnant. Lori sees fit to ask Glenn, who is going into town with one of Herschel's daughters, absolute gorgeous Maggie, who plays the farmer's daughter so well in season 2 of The Walking. Oh my God. Glenn, in all of his luck, goes on all these runs with Maggie, picking up feminine products on the side for Lori, but also picking up his own little nookie with Maggie, who's kind of like, hey, you know, you're the only guy around here that I actually want to sleep with, so, you know, the last man on earth kind of thing. And this leads to one of the coolest things that happened in the early part of the show. In fact, it is the thing that got me to become a fan of The Walking Dead. After learning that there were a bunch of walkers being held in the barn because Herschel thought they could be cured, Shane, who's been rubbing his head and losing it a lot because we find out that he also shot Otis to save himself, and Otis really didn't sacrifice himself. But Shane had enough, and he couldn't rub his head enough. And he was done with it. He decided he was going to go off, open up the barn, and they were going to take out all of these walkers who were about a stone's throw away from where they had been sleeping for the past week or so. Herschel is mortified at this as the crew just guns down all the walkers because, again, he thinks that they can be cured, and some of the walkers that are in there are his son and his wife. However, that isn't the only surprise, as coming out of the barn, last but not least, was Sophia, who had been bitten and had been a walker and had been in the barn the entire time. On a personal note, I did not start watching The Walking Dead until 2019, so I binged the first 7 seasons. I was lukewarm on the show up until this very scene. When I got to this scene and she walked out of that barn, I paused. I remember pausing Netflix and going, Yes, The Walking Dead is not going to give you nice cookie cutter happy endings. The Walking Dead is going to be brutally, almost sadistically real. Well, maybe not real, but just sadistically negative. Not everything is going to have a happy ending. And Sophia is dead. Rick is mortified because he's the one that was supposed to save her and she ran away instead of him saving her. Carol is distraught because obviously her daughter's dead. Daryl has lost all hope because he put all of his chips into saving this girl. And Rick has to put her down by shooting her in the head. Kind of an allusion and a throwback to the very first scene of episode 1 of the entire series. A note about Shane here, because he is the antagonist during this first story arc. Shane is not wrong. Yes, Shane was psycho. He went crazy. He was crazy with jealousy, crazy with not really understanding things. But he was also crazy because he saw what the world was before the rest of the crew did. And in fact, the rest of the series proves that Shane, the way Shane thought about things, about the rest of the world in season 2 was actually right. But at this point in time, everybody's like, you're psycho, you're crazy. The other people in the crew start to come around. Even Carl, who gets a little bloodthirsty after he recovers from his injuries. Shane wants to kill this intruder. He wants to kill this kid, does not want him there because the kid kind of confessed to Daryl that the crew he was with were kind of scumbags who raped and pillaged women. So Shane did not want these people coming anywhere near Carl and Lori. Daryl and Rick wind up agreeing with them, and in fact, the rest of the crew, including Herschel and his family, wind up agreeing that they kind of need to get rid of this guy because it's dangerous for other people to know where they are. Dale, being the sole voice of reason, decided, no, if you do this, then we lose our humanity. Dale's death here at the hands of the walker that Carl didn't kill, and unbeknownst to him, led back to the farm. Dale's death is actually a pretty significant one because Dale, being the voice of reason, even though he was nosy, even though he was a bit of a busybody, and even though he was kind of creepy around Andrea, he was the last little remnant of the old way, the world as which we knew before the zombies, the civilized world. And he makes this great plea in his final episode towards the team to say, hey, we're going to lose our humanity if we wind up executing people. But everybody else is like, Dale, you don't know what kind of world we're in. And nah. And I think it's very poignant. When Dale dies after his death, from here on out, the crew is no longer civilized. Rick, however, being kind of a bit of a softie still, decided they were going to honor Dale's last wishes and they were going to let this kid go way far away from the farm so he wouldn't be able to trace anybody back to them. Shane, again, concocts this plan where he's just completely lost it, and he's going to take Randall out and kill Randall and say that Randall attacked him, so then he can get a search party to go out after Randall into the woods, where he then planned to get Rick alone so he could kill Rick. Now, a lot of people were catching on to this very early on, including Daryl, who said, he came back with a dead man's gun. Of course he was lying. Rick ain't stupid. He knows it too. It didn't help either that Lori kind of egged Rick on a little bit earlier in season 2. She's like, Shane is obsessed and he's not going to stop. And that crazy scene where you get one of our first looks at the what I call Rick murder face. He has another great look. We're out in the woods and Shane is talking all this BS, and Daryl, who there was, if you go back and look at season 2, there was a little bit of a kind of a conflict between Daryl and Shane as to who was Rick's number 2. Rick knows what's going on, and there's this whole part where Rick just looks at Shane like, really Shane, you are so full of shit. They get out into the moonlight, they have the big confrontation, and Rick, once again, using his verbal skills, lulls Shane into a false sense of security, and unfortunately has to stab and kill his best friend. Carl happens upon the body after this happened, and Carl, thinking that Shane had been taken down by a walker, because they tried to make you think that Carl was kind of more sympathetic towards Shane than his own father, but it turned out that Carl was going to shoot oncoming walker Shane in the head and putting him down. The only problem with this is all of these gunshots, and apparently a helicopter that was way back in the city that led all of these walkers out to near the farm. All of that combined led for yet again another walker sacking of a campsite, this time Herschel's farm. So they drove away, leaving Andrea and Carol out there, but fortunately for Carol, Daryl came by on his bike and they rode off and escaped the farm, and that was pretty much the end of the Greene farm. The aftermath of this is pretty bad. They wind up meeting back on the road where they lost Sophia, and there's a very poetic thing where you see the sign that they had left for Sophia kind of washed away, which, Walking Dead's always good with those kind of like ironic little shots that they take and scenes that they show that kind of tell a story within themselves. That's one of the best things about the show. But after this, Rick kind of confesses to Lori, who's kind of happy that they survived, and then she quickly becomes mortified when Rick says, yeah, I killed Shane. And yeah, I didn't have to, but I was just so tired of it. I just wanted it to be over. He tried to lead me out and all this stuff, and I killed him. And and Lori is just mortified by him. And then later on, we find out what it was that Jenner had whispered to Rick in the season finale of season 1, which we never found out, and they teased throughout season 2, but we finally found out at the end of season 2 what it was that Jenner said, and it was that it wasn't the walker bites that turned you into the zombies. Everybody had this wildfire disease, and if you die, no matter how you die, you become a walker. Carol's not too happy about the fact that Rick left this very important detail out and never told them about it. Daryl's and Herschel are kind of siding with Rick. They're like, yeah, Rick's done right by me. T-Dog's sitting here like, these white people crazy. Glenn doesn't know what to do with himself, and Lori is just mortified. Rick then completely loses it and then just blurts out the fact that he killed his best friend for you people, which Carl didn't know, and Carl starts crying because Shane was his boy. He loved Shane, and his dad killed him, and that's just horrible. But this was the beginning of the Rick-tatorship, and Rick's like, look, you guys are gonna keep questioning me. Go ahead out there and see what you can do by yourselves. Let me know how far you get. Send me a postcard. And they're like, nobody's leaving. He's like, oh, nobody's leaving? Fine, but this is no longer a democracy. I literally thought that he said it was a dictatorship when I watched the show back and kept forgetting that, no, he actually doesn't say that. That's something the fans came up with, the dictatorship. I was waiting for the lie to drop, it never comes. But arc number 1 ends as they crane up to the shot of the prison off in the distance, which would then lead us into the second story arc of the Walking Dead TV show, which of course is titled The Prison, or you could call it the Governor arc. But we'll get into that next time as we continue to do our story arc recaps of the Walking Dead TV show leading up to the premiere of season 11 coming up at the end of August. If you guys have any quotes or comments or anything you want to talk about, let your voice be heard in the comment box below. Until then, I'll see you guys next time as we dip into the second story arc here on the Rantin Review Entertainment. Have a good day.